Ecocha exclusively represents specialty Taiwan teas with over 25 years of immersion in the Taiwanese tea industry and tea culture. And today we are here tasting the recently harvested batch of winter Shan Lin High Mountain Oolong tea. On my left I have last winter's harvest, and on my right I have the recent winter 2020 harvest that we are going to compare. And I brewed 9 grams of tea leaves in 150 milliliters of water, first for 90 seconds and then for 60 seconds. Before we get into the brewed tea, looking at the dried leaves, the winter 2019 batch looks significantly more mature than the winter 2020. The nuggets of rolled leaves are larger and there's more yellowing going on, which indicates a more mature leaf. So it looks like they were just picked at a later stage in their growth phase. And this batch, our recent procurement of winter 2020 batch, is somewhat of an anomaly. Our friend who manages this farm pruned back a certain section of the farm and planned that section to grow what he intended to be at the same time. So in other words, he planned the growth period, typically 55 to maybe for winter 65 days, and wanted to harvest the pruned section together with the rest of the farm. It turns out that the pruned section grew a lot faster, and he had to schedule a special harvest for a very small area of the farm, bringing a very small team of pickers up there, investing more money. Since the amount of tea harvested was so small, he brought the tea to his home factory that he uses for his home plot of tea to make traditional Dong Ding Oolong tea, and processed the High Mountain tea by himself. It turns out that day that the small plot that he harvested, the night before was very humid, and at that elevation created a lot of dew. So the leaves were wet when they were harvested, which is not unusual at all. And that's why there's solar withering. They get spread out on tarps and get dried, and then begin their wilting process that precedes the oxidation phase. So he brought this batch of fresh leaf to his home and began processing it. And the day was slightly cloudy. It wasn't rainy, which would be kind of catastrophic with a traditional style factory that he has. With the modern factories, they have fans and heaters, and they kind of take care of they compensate for not ideal weather. In his yard, it's just a sanheyuan, a 3-sided traditional home, and it relies on decent weather. And the weather was decent, it just wasn't sunny. And he wanted to make this batch of tea into a traditional Dong Ding Oolong tea for a long-term client. And he worked very hard to accomplish that, extending the wilting period until 4 a.m. The following morning before he started the cease oxidation or tumble heating. And so he really wanted to push the leaves to oxidize by dragging out the process, basically. And I showed up actually the morning after he got the leaves, after they were rolled, and tasted it with him. And I said, "Are you really going to roast this, to a medium roast tea?" And he's like, "Yeah." And I didn't say anything else. And I brought a sample home, and I called him later and I said, "Hey, I'm gonna want a significant amount of winter tea from you, and you have a small amount of this batch. What if I just buy the whole day's harvest as High Mountain tea? You don't need to roast it, and then you can work out your client that wants traditionally made Dong Ding Oolong tea later." And he's like, "Great," because he was pushing his own. He was kind of trying to make himself believe that he could make this it's a heavier oxidation than the standard High Mountain tea, but it's not enough oxidized to produce a traditional Dong Ding that could withstand fairly extensive roasting. So we've been very grateful for all of his teaching and guidance and knowledge that we've picked his brain for many years now, and we were really happy to be able to help him solve a very small dilemma that he was in, to be able to sell this tea as a high mountain tea that's slightly more oxidized than standard, and not have to worry about how it's going to turn out if he roasted it. We did, however, ask him to dry roast it, which means to just bake it at a low temperature. He baked it at 75 degrees Celsius for 8 hours to remove all the remaining moisture. And that does have an effect on the flavor. It takes out that grassy green and it turns it into more of a slightly pastry, sometimes floral. So let's see what we got here. I'm going to first smell the winter batch. It's still warm, not hot anymore. Soft, slightly savory, foresty, kind of a mild but kind of classic Shan Lin High Mountain Oolong aroma. Interesting. Slightly fruity. I guess that's the result of the pushed oxidation factor. Yes, sweet. Light fruity, almost apple or apple blossom, something like that. Pear. Surprisingly sweet and fruity. It's really pleasant. The brewed tea, it's obvious that there's a difference in oxidation. The Winter 2019 is lighter, more standard coloration for a High Mountain Oolong, and the Winter 2020 is a darker golden, kind of pushing golden yellow. This is a yellowish green. I would say this is a yellowish gold. Let's have a sip. Flowery, delicious. Wow, it really held its character for a year, Winter 2019. It's got some pine forest kind of thing. Shan is Shan in Chinese. The first word of Shan Lin Shi is fir, as a fir tree. So it's fir, forest, river is the literal translation of Shan Lin Shi. And somehow the tea kind of carries that essence in its flavor and aromatic profile. A little bit flattened out, but the water is smooth. Nice smooth texture on the water. A little more vegetal in the second brew for the Winter 2019. Let's go straight into Winter 2020. The visual here, you can really see the thickness, not only the coloration, but there's just a little more luminosity, a little bit of an oily kind of visual texture coming off the brewed tea. Very different flavor profile. The texture is very thick and smooth. The most significant aspect of the character of this tea is its mouthfeel. Maybe dried fruit. It's not really, it's not fresh, floral. It's slightly sweet. It's so balanced and integrated. It's hard to identify any particular flavor note. It's got a nice clean finish. It's lingering in my nose. I'm getting a nice refreshing palate feel. Okay, a little bit more of the classic High Mountain Oolong on the back of the throat. Sweet, floral, not quite fruity, but something with this sweet and fragrant aspect. And the nose, then the finish, is really substantial. If I had to choose one word to describe this Winter 2020 Shan Lin Shi, it would be substantial. It's got substance. It's got thickness in its texture, and that most likely, well, it could be to have to do with the new growth coming off the leaves. The plants are pushing themselves to create vegetation to survive, basically. So there's a certain chemistry to that, I think. I've experienced that several times at least, where new growth has just a different composition, literally, I think, in the leaves. And then, more specifically for this batch, the way it was processed. He was really pushing it to be a more significantly oxidized tea to use to make something like a Dong Ding Oolong. And he basically didn't quite achieve that goal. So we have a tea that's between High Mountain tea and the Mao cha, as it's called, basically the raw material, the finished product but pre-roasting to make a Dong Ding. That didn't really hit the mark for a proper Dong Ding. So it's a relatively heavily oxidized High Mountain tea made from new young growth after a pruning of the trees. I'm going to take another sip of the second brew. The mouthfeel is amazing. It's not striking. It's not. It doesn't have a lot of bright, fragrant qualities to it, but it's very balanced and it's very full and integrated in its flavor profile. I have a feeling I'm going to enjoy this like a tea that you really don't ever get tired of. A lot of the greener and especially the conventionally processed High Mountain teas, they're very fragrant, and when you first taste them, you're blown away by the complexity of it. But if you try to drink that tea every day, it gets old, frankly speaking, in my opinion. And I know that people here in my world kind of share that, and that's, well, I live very close to Lugu, where traditionally made tea is kind of the more, is the tea of preference for a lot of people. And High Mountain tea is appreciated for what it is, but it's just, it's more monotone, and it's got one thing going for it, which is this fresh, fragrant, floral kind of bouquet, very striking. But this tea has character on a more subtle and more substantial level. It's got a foundation, and without the facade, so to speak, if I may just try to pull an analogy out of my head. So there you have it. If you're looking for that classic complex floral and vibrant, kind of bright profile in a High Mountain tea, I would not recommend our Winter 2020 Shan Lin. Go for our Li Shan, is a good representative of that, and the Ali Shan hasn't been harvested yet, probably in the next couple of weeks, but classically our Ali Shan source makes a fairly conventional High Mountain tea of that oxidation level. So go for those two. Ali Shan for a slightly lower elevation than Shan Lin, Li Shan for a much higher elevation if you're looking for the classic High Mountain Oolong. If you're looking for something that's different and has a subtle but more substantial character, and you want to drink it every day or a lot, I would recommend this tea. I think it's one of those teas that it's a little bit, I wouldn't say underwhelming, it's just not extremely in your face, impressive upon the first tasting. But when you brew it time after time, I'm just looking forward to, based on experience, I feel that this tea will grow, my appreciation will grow for it with repeated brews. I'm going to quickly take the dried leaves out of these porcelain dishes, and we'll get a quick visual of the brewed leaves. So what I saw in the dried leaves is that the Winter 2020 is fairly standard, seems pretty normal in its size. It doesn't seem immature. The stem material seems thinner than usual, so I think they just, as I said, the plants just tried to produce leaf as fast as possible. So they're a little more tender, which makes the oxidation process easier. So despite the fact that the leaves came in wet and he didn't have a lot of sun to push them and kickstart them into their wilting and oxidation that's required for a traditionally made tea, they did get an even oxidation, and it's maybe something like deep. It's just, you can see it and feel it in the brewed tea, that there was intentional oxidation going on. Okay, so last winter's tea was pretty mature. These are substantial growth on what's being picked here. The stems are harder, stiffer, which makes the wilting and especially the moisture removal more challenging. So it's surprising that I guess our friend asks the rolling factory that he uses continually to put it through the drying machine a couple more times after what they would consider to be complete, to remove any remaining 1 or 2% of moisture. So that's probably why this tea maintained its character as well as it has. So again, winter 2020, an anomaly batch, so to speak, based on the circumstances and the skill and effort that I first heard about this tea over a glass of whiskey in celebration of this master tea maker's birthday. And he's like, oh, it was a big headache. I stayed up all night long trying to push this tea to make it into a traditional tea. And I said, I don't think you got what you wanted. How about I just take the whole batch and take a slightly more oxidized batch of winter High Mountain tea. And I'm very happy to have it. I personally like this kind of tea a lot. It's just, like I said, it's something that grows on you. So give it a try if that interests you. And if you want something more standard in the High Mountain tea, go for our Li Shan or upcoming Ali Shan High Mountain Oolong teas. Thanks for being with us. If you haven't already, please subscribe to our YouTube channel, hit that like button, and share this video with anyone that you think might be interested in hearing about this kind of stuff. See you next time.